In this 25th anniversary year of September 11th, the Tunnel to Towers Foundation continues to honor America's heroes. Heroes like Fire Lieutenant Michael Wells, who was inspired by 9/11 to serve his community. After 14 dedicated years of service, he lost his battle with occupational cancer, leaving behind his wife, Katie, and their 3 children. Tunnel to Towers honored Lieutenant Wells by paying off the family's mortgage in recognition of his sacrifices. Donate $11 monthly and amplify your impact with a car or land donation. Go to T2T.org.
Welcome to your personal briefing. The Full Court Press is on the air. Now, here's Sean Spicer.
Welcome back to Full Court Press on WABC. I'm your host, Sean Spicer. Thanks for tuning in this Sunday morning. I'm excited to be joined by somebody who can break down all of the big issues that we're facing right now. Former Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, former Virginia Attorney General, all-around great guy. Ken Cuccinelli, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure, Sean, as always.
All right, so I want to start with the White House Correspondents' Dinner, then I want to get into the Supreme Court ruling, and then obviously I really need your take on what's going on in Virginia. So there are some folks in the media, and by the way, thanks to the Democrats for finally funding Homeland Security, or at least most of it. I think what happened was pretty much a disgrace that all of these folks from the Coast Guard to the Secret Service to FEMA, whatever, went without pay and didn't, and the media did not hold the Democrats accountable for what they did.
Shocking.
Yeah, shocking. Do you think that we learned any lessons, though? Because it scares me that post 9/11 we said never forget, and here we went 70 some odd days without funding the key aspects of Homeland.
Well, yes, and I will even broaden it. Obviously, I have DHS affinities, but why on earth does a law not already exist on the books to flat fund the government when there isn't a budget? Well, I'll answer my own question. It's the appropriators party. What was Trent Lott's quote? There are 3 parties, the Republicans, the Democrats, and the appropriators, because the appropriators won't allow it. Everybody listening, and you know this, Sean, should know they want this chaos. And this is not just Democrats. Democrats did it at this terrible time with DHS, and I agree with you, Sean, in terms of what they've done here and when was particularly egregious. But both parties, for a variety of political reasons, mostly so they can jam pork in bills, and they did it here too, refuse to solve the problem on a permanent basis. I don't care who the president is. I don't care who has Congress. America shouldn't be embarrassed by the wheels coming off its government every 6 or 8 months. This is governmentally embarrassing for the greatest nation in the history of the world. And it is the easiest thing in the world to fix, but they don't want to fix it. They want it broken. And here we are in May, and we're going to be doing this again in October because they refuse to fix it, including our Republican appropriators.
I agree. I mean, look, Ron Johnson has a great bill, which just says the No Shutdown Act, and you fund at current levels, and we don't have to deal with this again because I shouldn't have to walk through a line and thank a TSA agent who's making $40,000 a year for showing up to work, not getting paid. I don't think these guys, the Coast Guard last week saying that they had to shut off some of the lights and electricity at Coast Guard stations. But can I just look, what really got to me, Ken, was this Secret Service agent that took a bullet
while not being paid. While not being paid. Yep. And
there was no outrage. But let me just, how concerned, just if I can shift, because I've now expressed my outrage, you've agreed. But do you think, I believe that what happened at the dinner the other night shows the system worked. The guy went through, they took him down. That's the system working. A lot of Democrats and folks in the media said that was a security lapse. What do you say as the former deputy of Secretary of Homeland Security?
So what worked was the men and women of Secret Service. That was a manpower stop, not a technology stop, not a planned stop, meaning the system didn't catch them, et cetera. That was men and women putting themselves between danger and their protectees. That's how it worked. And look, there's no one I would trust more than my fellow Americans, and particularly those who choose to go into the Secret Service, knowing that part of your role is to take a bullet, and did, while not being paid. We cannot overemphasize that enough, to your credit, Sean. But having said that, I am concerned with how close the final perimeter was to the event. I would love to see that looked at a little more closely. And taking a bigger look, going all the way back to the Pennsylvania shooting of President Trump that killed one and injured others, in addition to President Trump, I want to know how much of the independent commission report, which was an outstanding report, and I don't say that very often, has been implemented. How much of it has been implemented? How much have they fixed the Biden era cultural problem where their first priority was DEI, not protecting protectees? Should this perimeter have been at the building's edge? Should it have been at the elevators where guests came down who were registered in the hotel, which is where this shooter would have come from? And I can't answer that directly, but I am a little surprised that he could basically get to the doors of the room. And, I mean, a rifle will go through those walls.
Okay.
To put it in simple terms.
I agree. It's funny because I do wonder how much of, to your point, post 9/11, like how much of the stuff has been looked at. So let's move on to, before I get to Virginia, because I think that people are so clueless to what you have been saying about the violations of the law in Virginia, the patent, the lack of understanding the calendar and the math and what the legislature did. But before I do that, I need you to weigh in on the Voting Rights Act and the implications of what the court said, because I mentioned this in the first block, Ken. The Democrats said that the court was illegitimate, it was corrupt, and yet the court simply said we can't use race as the basis and by the way, that only benefited Democrats, as the basis for what we're doing. What? Give me your take, and what should people know about the court ruling?
Well, first they should know that the court acknowledged the progress we've made in the last 60, 70 years on race. And look, I was the attorney general of a southern state, Virginia, and the history in Virginia, similar to other southern states, is the Democrat one-party leadership suppressed the black vote. They did it. They used the government. They used the power of the law to do it. Voting Rights Act was used to remedy that. And by and large, in my view, it has remedied it. And that's what the court said. And I'll go back 10 years to their Jefferson County case where preclearance was eliminated, where they said, look, Congress presented no findings of ongoing racism, like systemic racism, which we did have systemic racism in Virginia when I was a kid. But that's gone now. And we should be grateful for that. That's growing as a country. That doesn't mean there isn't a person in this country who doesn't have racism in their heart. It means that the function of our law and our electoral system isn't polluted by racism anymore like it used to be. And that means that the Voting Rights Act, this is according to the ruling this week, can be used to address intentional discrimination based on race. They said that. You can fight racial discrimination using the Voting Rights Act. The Supreme Court said that. The complaint of the other side is, well, that's too hard. That's too hard. We need other things. We need disparate impact. We need excuses that get away from racism and really start to wander into politics. And that is the fundamental complaint of the other side in the Louisiana case is, yeah. It's nice to be against intentional discrimination. Everybody is. Yes, everybody is, including on the court and using the Voting Rights Act. But that's not enough for the left.
No.
Because
again, it
to be able to use this as an excuse to draw lines.
Right. I mean, look, I've said this before. I don't want to relitigate it, but the bottom line is the only people who benefited from that ruling were Democrats, right? Republicans, you mentioned your Virginia, where you and I both live. You served as Attorney General. We had a black Democratic governor, Wilder. Then we had a black statewide Lieutenant Governor, Winsome Sears. Like, the home of the Confederacy has elected black statewide to constitutional offices. Not to mention all the Republicans that don't need this. But let's move to Virginia for a second. I want to talk about this case just to lay it out for everyone, because I think the way you describe this between 2025 issues and 2026 is perfect. But let me just give the audience a quick understanding. So Virginia is currently represented 6-5 by Democrats in its 11-seat congressional delegation to Washington. The Democrats drew new seats that would be 10-1. Under the guidance of being, quote, fair and temporary, which is a lie. The court, so there's two issues. Can you explain to people right now? So the voters voted, actually they voted a few years back, 63% not to allow partisan gerrymandering. And then the Democrats decided to change that under the guise of temporary and fair, despite the will of the people in Virginia. But explain to people the issues that are at stake, because we're talking about 4 seats that could easily be the majority. So the people of Virginia barely voted now to advance this new map. But explain to people what's going on in terms of the issues that were brought up in 2025 versus the issues that were brought up in 2026.
So all of the issues in Virginia right now are state constitutional issues. And there's a very particular process for amending the state constitution. And in 2025, the Democrat General Assembly met in October. Ironically, they passed their proposed amendment on Halloween, and they did it in a way that violated arguably the state constitution in 2 different ways and 1 statute. So I call those the 2025 violations. And then in January, the new General Assembly came in and passed the amendment for the second time, called second passage, very creative. And the way they submitted it to the voters and the timing and the language, the egregious language, violated the state constitution an additional different way and violated our statute on plain English ballot language. So I call those the 2026 violations. And then there's the maps themselves, the proposed 10-1 map, and we have a compactness and contiguity requirement of our state constitution. And if that map doesn't violate it, no map ever will. But you don't get to the map unless the referendum survives. And for the referendum's 3-point win to survive, the defenders of the win, the Attorney General Jay Jones of infamy, has to win every single one of the 3 constitutional challenges and both statutory challenges to the referendum. And every single one of those 5, standing on its own, is a strong challenge. Every single one of them. So they have a very tall legal hill to climb here. And the issues that have already been argued to the Supreme Court are the 2025 issues. That's what the oral argument was on Monday. That's the case we're waiting to see a final ruling on. The 2026 issues, a trial court judge issued an injunction stopping the counting of votes from the referendum and the certification of that election, which would have happened without the injunction today, Sean. Today was the day for that. And that injunction has been left in place by the Virginia Supreme Court, which is not the usual pattern. And what it tells me is that the Virginia Supreme Court has probably got the votes to throw out the referendum. And so since they're going to issue a permanent injunction anyway, they left the temporary one in place. And
if that happens, then the vote is invalidated and we go back to the 6-5 map?
Yes. The technically correct way to say it is we stay at the 6-5 maps. We don't go back. We have never
Got,
had
good point.
the 10-to-1 maps.
But one of the other issues that Jay Jones, the attorney general that wants to kill his opponents, was stymied actually on CNN of all places. They said in Virginia there's supposed to be 90 days before that second legislative vote that you mentioned, and the voters, and it clearly didn't happen. And so I don't understand, if the law says you have to wait 90 days and you didn't even come close to that, how is that on itself? There's everything else like that. That's not even, I mean, I didn't take math in college, Ken, but I can count that high.
Yeah, my joke on this, Sean, is lots of people go into law to avoid math, but even one of those lawyers knows that when the second passage is on January 16th and voting starts on March 6th, that's less than 90 days. It's less than 2 months, much less 3 months. So their argument there is that what counts for the 90 days is just April 21st, even though the language of our
meaning election day versus early voting.
Well, that's the 2025 one. That's election day. Here in 2026, the language says 90 days have to pass before the amendment is submitted to the voters. Well, what does submitted to the voters mean? And they want to argue that because you can vote all the way up to April 21st, that's the date that counts. But submitted to the voters in a state that emphasizes plain English reading relative to, say, federal interpretive practices, we're much more heavily tied to the language itself in Virginia than in the federal level. When you've got that sort of a language submitted to the voters, and the Democrats, by the way, gave us this ridiculous 45-day election that now has people voting on March 6th for an April 21st supposed election. They're going to get hoisted on their own petard on that one. That's probably the strongest single argument, and it isn't even before the court yet. That one, because it's a 2026 argument, is part of the second case to come before the Virginia Supreme Court if none of the first three 2025 challenges succeed. But I don't think we're going to get to the 2026 challenges, even though that one you just described, Sean, is the strongest of them all, because of
yeah. Well, so. Ken, thank you for spending part of your Sunday with us. This is again what the media won't tell you. Ken Cuccinelli, former Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, former Attorney General of Virginia. Thanks for joining us on WABC today.
My pleasure.
All right, guys, you heard this, and this is what's important to understand because the media won't tell you these facts. So just listen to what, again, the former Attorney General of Virginia said. Think about this. Okay, first of all, the legislature has to do two, according to the law in Virginia, has to have 2 sessions pass it with an intervening election. They didn't really do that. They called a special session, which is not a legislative session. Voting was already underway in Virginia. Then they passed it because the Democrats have control. Then they had an election, which was in November, and then they immediately came in and did it again. That's a violation. That's not what the Constitution says. Then Ken Cuccinelli mentioned that the law in Virginia says that they have to have plain English. They didn't. They lied to voters. They confused them. They said it was fair and temporary. That's not fair or temporary, and they knew it. So that's another violation, right? And then when you get down to it, and you mentioned this is a 2026 issue, the law says you have to have 90 days before that final product is presented to Virginia. We were starting to vote. They passed it in February, starting to vote in March. That's not even close to 90 days. And I'm just telling you, I mean, that's a full-on lie. I mean, the bottom line is they know it, and they're just going to keep perpetuating this. But don't let them confuse you. And the other big thing that they always love to tell you is that Republicans started this in Texas. This is not true. It started in New York last cycle. They tried to get rid of a bunch of districts 2 years ago, and the New York Supreme Court said you're not following the law. So I'm so tired. I mean, when Democrats do this to us, they just say it's normal and this is what's that. When Republicans take it upon themselves to actually use these same democratic institutions like the court, they go, oh my God, you're undermining democracy. Democracy is under attack. That's ridiculous. And I'm so tired. I mean, but they have a complicit media. Anyway, I think it's important, and that's the beauty of the show, is you're not going to hear these conversations anywhere else. I mean, Ken Cuccinelli just broke it down like nobody else will. And I don't know how. I mean, I get courts are political, and that's the other thing. The Virginia court is appointed and reappointed by the legislature, which is controlled by wackadoodle Dems. I mean, these people are nuts. And so they're going to try to audition for them, I don't think successfully. Because they all think the Republicans, by the way, who think somehow the Democrats are going to reappoint them, must be smoking something. And so either they rule on the law, and again, it's not even like all you have to do is count and go, okay, that's a violation. Ken Cuccinelli laid it all out there for you. This isn't even a question of like digging back into your law books. This is a question of can you count? Anyway, we've got another block coming your way. You're listening to Full Court Press here on WABC. I am your host, Sean Spicer. We'll be right back.
This is Full Court Press with Sean Spicer on 77 WABC.
Sacco and Felix, New York and New Jersey's premier attorneys at law. Their team brings decades of experience across a wide range of practice areas. Whatever life brings, they're your legal team. From everyday matters to complex cases, they've got you covered with the experience you need and the results you want. Because when life gets complicated, they make it simple. SaccoFilas.com. SACCOFILLAS.com. 2 C's, 2 L's.